Hello everybody. Welcome to From Ash to Air Tarot. This is my very first video, and I wanted to introduce myself and talk a little bit about my channel, what I'd like it to be about, what I'd like to offer, and also a little bit about my background and how I developed my love for tarot cards and oracle cards and how this whole journey began for me. So first I'll start by saying that there are so many wonderful tarot channels out there. The community on YouTube is really wonderful, and I have found myself in the last year decompressing with many of the videos that most of you publish. And particularly, I started off being a follower of the Hermit's Cave and really enjoying Simon's videos and his offerings, and then from there it grew into me sort of becoming a voyeur on a lot of other tarot channels. This is something that I have been enthusiastic about since I was a kid. I got my very first deck when I was 12 years old, and this is it. It's in this little box that used to house a bunch of chess pieces, but I made it a little box for my tarot deck. And my mother was the one who bought me my first deck. I really wanted a tarot deck, and she was just the coolest kind of mom, was willing to do that and buy that for me. I think we got it at a bookstore like Barnes and Nobles, but I don't really remember which bookstore it was. There were only a few decks on display in the New Age metaphysical section, and they were all RWS in style. There weren't any Marseille or Lenormand. But this deck, really, at that time I didn't know anything about the other types of decks that were out there. I didn't have any idea about the history of tarot. Nothing. I was a newbie with all of the information, and I just was intrigued by the art of divination, and I wanted to explore it. So this deck was chosen purely on the aesthetic and what my 12-year-old mind liked in terms of the artwork. This particular version of the Aquarian Terra was published in 1970 by Morgan Press Incorporated. So it is a vintage deck now. And I would say it's a very mature deck to start your tarot journey with. I think, I don't know that I would buy a deck like this for a kid myself today, because merely because there are so many decks out there now to choose from, and there are a lot of softer, less intense ways to introduce the mystery of tarot to a young person. So, but nevertheless, that just added to the intrigue of this deck for me. So I was a very old soul as a kid. I grew up like an only child because my brother and sister were 15, 16 years older than me and were out of the house by the time I was 3. So I had a very active imagination, an active sort of make-believe life world that I created for myself with imaginary friends and whatnot. And I was always fascinated with the questions, the existential questions of why we're here, how did we get here, where are we going, and I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact that my family was not particularly religious, but they were spiritual. I was born Catholic, baptized, did my communion, never made it to my confirmation. The reason being that when I came home right before my first communion from Sunday school, and I told my father that I was going to have to confess for the first time, and could he help me come up with some sins, because I had to, I wanted to make sure that my confession was interesting and appropriate. And when he heard, my 7-8-year-old self say, Dad, help me come up with some sins, he realized that he didn't want me to take that structured, dogmatic path. So I was pulled out of Sunday school. I didn't have to go back. And then I never made my confirmation. But, I would say that my family, they're Christian, but open-minded and not afraid of any of this, or uh, not attached to any of the stigma that's involved with anything that has to do with the occult or paganism. So anyway, I was lucky enough to get this deck at 12. And right off the bat, I will say that not having any experience with tarot cards, I took the little white book pretty seriously and literally. And it's an intense little book. It's, as we all know, these instruction books are meant to be a quick reference guide. They're really not as enlightening as the larger book is, that will give you explanations on the artwork and the symbols and all of the detail that the deck has within it, that it contains. And admittedly, some of the reversals in this are very abrupt: deception, voided project, bad faith, loss of family reputation or inheritance, be careful of financial dealings, illness, suspicion, distrustful. Just the reversals had a huge negative connotation to them. Now, as a mature, grown person and a reader now, I don't. I don't ignore reversals. I respect, obviously, the person who created the deck, and if they say that this deck wasn't intended to be read with reversals, then I don't. But it really kind of, reversals are all contingent upon who I'm reading for, what the vibe is, how that card is in relation to the cards around it, etc., etc. So I don't have any hard, fast rules about reversals. But at that time, my 12-year-old brain was pretty intimidated by the reversals, and I didn't like it when the card would be in a reverse position. So it was therefore an intense first deck. But let me just show you the card that jumped out at me and made me want this deck. It's the High Priestess. Oh, I mean, everything about this card is just so inviting and mysterious. I looked at it and I would say to myself, who is this High Priestess woman? Why is she dressed in this exotic outfit with this fabulous headpiece behind this curtain and holding a wilted flower and looking at it with, pathos? There was so much going on in her face looking at this flower. And then in the distance, across a field in a valley, was a castle in the mountain. And what king and queen ruled the land there, and was she somehow an advisor to the king? And and on and on and on the story in my mind went with this card, and it just drew me into this deck. I also found the representation of people in the deck interesting, because they're almost marbleized, but not cold in a way that you can't connect with them. They just had a sorrowful, sort of sophisticated expression about their faces. The artwork, the artist depicted this world with a stoicism that I found really fascinating. So I'll also say that the cards have a very Art Deco feel to them too, which I also really like. And I think that was the intention of the creator of this deck. But it also has a vintage feel to it. It very much looks like a deck of its time, and particularly the Sun card has that sort of groovy 1960s, 70s feel to it, I think. But you see what I mean by the faces have a seriousness to them. Look at the Temperance card. Look at her face. She's just so... Gosh, I don't even know the word that I want to use to describe it, because it's not it draws you in, even though they have that marbleized look about them. Their expressions draw you in because they have sort of a melancholy, thoughtful look to them. Gosh, I love the World card. It's so pretty. That's very Art Deco-y. Yeah, a really beautiful deck. And when I got this deck, the first thing I did that summer was recruit two of my girlfriends to create a house of fortune with me so that we could charge people in the neighborhood and do readings. And we charged 25 cents a reading. We set it up in my garage with clotheslines and sheets to separate the garage into four sections. And each section was a different room in our house of fortune. Tarot, I think it was palmistry, tea leaf readings, and crystal ball readings. And we dressed like gypsies, and we made posters that we hung in the neighborhood. We didn't have very many customers. I think my friend's little brother was one, and maybe my dad, and a couple of other parents. Yeah, that's, I love the Magician as well. So that's the beginning of my tarot journey, was with this deck. And I don't really use this deck anymore. It's become sort of an iconic historical deck for me in my collection. It's in good shape. And I'd like to keep it that way as much as possible, because I don't think I can afford to replace it. It has so much of my energy in it, attached to it. And also because of the specialness of it being my first, I don't feel really comfortable reading other people unless they were like a family member or a really close friend. So I keep this for myself, but I will say that now I respect this deck in a way that I never did when I was a kid, and I'm not fearful of the reversals. I just think that it gives a really no bones about it reading. So whenever I need to get some serious advice, I will pull it out, and it never lets me down. It's a really wonderful addition to my collection, and I cherish it. The next deck that I acquired was when I was in my mid-20s, and it was the Voyager Tarot. And the story behind this deck is I was about to go across country to graduate school, and it was a big turning point, a crossroads or a milestone in my life, and I went to have a reading done. I was also in a lot of young person angst because I was leaving my boyfriend of 7 years that I had dated all through college, and was in flux about what that relationship, what the fate of it was going to be. And I was leaving home and going to a part of the country where I knew no one. So this deck was significant because the woman who read for me used it, and the reading that she gave me was so complex. And I remember it was longer than an hour. I think it was at least 2 hours, 2.5 hours. She was a very fascinating person, and her reading was so profound for me at that time, because I felt like she just locked into me and just was able to know so much about who I was and what I was about. She just read me like a book. I'm telling you, it was one of those moments that you don't forget. One of those readings you'll never forget. And because of that, I decided to get the deck for myself, because I felt it would be sort of like a good luck charm on my trip, going to starting this new stage in my life. And the outcome card, I'll never forget the outcome card, and I don't want to reveal it because it's such a special moment, but I will say that the outcome card in my reading with her literally answered my question with so much specificity that it was just mind-blowing. It definitely had to come from spirit. So it's that this deck is just such a special deck for me. I love a lot of things about this deck. As you can see, it's been very used and well worn. This little book is beat up as heck. It's better than a little white book. It's got more in it. It's more comprehensive. And I did obviously use it a lot, but I did, not when I purchased the deck, but later on, a few years later, I did find a companion book to it. I don't think it was published at the same time that the deck was first published, so it kind of came out after the deck was out for a while. And as a result, by that time I had used the deck so much that I really didn't need to look at the larger book. But one of the things that I really like about the theme of this deck is I love the backs. I love this DNA symbol on the back of the card. It's like a microscope. It's what our DNA looks like under a microscope blown up. And I just think that universality with that image is just really cool. It's a beautiful, I mean, it's obviously these are a little beat up, but it's a really beautiful deck. And I like big cards. I know some people don't, but I have no problem with them. I like big cards because one of the things I love about collecting cards is the artist and what the artist has to say about each one of these iconic images and how they interpret them. And so I get very disappointed if I open a deck and the card, the artwork is very delicate and small and specific, and I can't see it because the card is too standard size or too small. I think that one of the ones that was a real disappointment for me was Shadowscapes, and I think Simon did a video about that, and I think he mentioned that there was a Russian publication of that deck that the cards were a different size, a bigger size. I wish I had that size because I remember when I bought that deck, the box was humongous, and then which was deceptive because you thought that the cards were big, but the cards are smaller than a standard tarot deck size. So, and her artwork is so beautiful, and it's just too bad because you have to really like hold it up and squint to see it. But anyway, getting back to this is a mixed media collage style type of artwork, and I love it. I know other people don't like that either, but I didn't feel like it was too busy. I always found something to inspire my intuition when I would look at the deck, at the picture. When I was reading for certain people, obviously I found that the image didn't lock me into one way of interpretation. There was always something new to see in it. And that's one of the reasons why I do like mixed media as a medium for tarot. The other thing I would say about this is that now that I have a little bit more of an acute aesthetic about what I like and what I don't, yeah, I'm not nuts about the borders, but I will say that because the writing is in white on beige, they are not as distracting when you see the keywords. These have keywords. I don't know if I can show it to you without it being a glare, but like you see fear is written at the top here. This is the Seven of Cups. But it never limited my interpretation of the cards when I was doing a reading. So it didn't really bother me. And every time I would read with this deck, people would comment on how beautiful the cards were. So it was a popular deck. Every time I used it, I never had anyone not like the deck or not be fascinated with it. And I would continue to use this deck now to read on other people. In fact, I prefer reading. It's funny because I prefer using this deck to read for others than for myself. Isn't it funny how you acquire decks over the years, and some decks are just for you and some decks feel right to use for others? To me, every deck has a personality. They become like a friend. and I don't know, they just they have a life of their own in a way. So anyway, this deck was my primary deck for the longest time. I had a few others. Most of them were oracles, though. But I will say that in the last, gosh, 6 months or so, I've bought more decks than I have in my entire life. So I will be using them and showing them on my channel. I don't know how many unboxings I'm going to actually do, because I feel like there are a lot of people out there who do it so well. I don't know if we need someone else doing unboxings. However, doing walkthroughs of decks that I like or that I'm excited about, I probably will do. But it would be more, more or less like my impressions and my feelings of the cards and why I like that particular deck. I don't know that I can keep up with the new releases like some other channels can. Um, but I am now addicted to indie decks. Thank you very much. So I haven't actually done a lot of supporting on Kickstarter and sites like that, backing decks, but I probably will sooner rather than later. And one last thing I'll say before I head off today is kind of wanted to explain why I chose the title From Ash to Air for my channel. So, as I said, I've been one of these people that has had pretty, well, I would call them tower moments. Like, I've had a lot of tower moments in my life where I have gone through like a whole awakening and a rebirth in some way. And the biggest one and the most unsettling happened about 5 years ago, when I went through a divorce after being in a long-term marriage. And that sort of put me on a new spiritual path. And because of having so many startovers or do-overs in my life, I really connect with the phoenix as a totem animal. And I know it's a mythical creature, but the mythology behind it is something that resonates very deeply with me. And there are a lot of, there are a lot of channels that have phoenix in the title. And I was thinking, well, what is it though about the phoenix that really is a good representation for me and my spiritual growth and my spiritual journey? And it's the whole concept of renewal and rebirth and resurrection in a way. Ironically, my birth name means rebirth, resurrection of springtime, and my spiritual name, which I go by with this channel, Akaldion, is also another definition of rebirth, except in Sanskrit. It was given to me when I studied Kundalini yoga and meditation. A guru meditated on me and my journey through the yogic path and presented me with this spiritual name. And in essence, it mirrored my birth name, which was really kind of relieving, because it meant that from childhood, I had a sense of my spiritual path. I had a sense of my destiny, and I was walking it. And so that was good. But so this whole concept of rebirth and regeneration and kind of, getting knocked down and getting back up again and coming back better and stronger than before is something that has always stayed with me, and particularly connected with in the last few years. And so when starting this channel, I thought, if I could be of service, if I could share readings that were insightful, that would help people on their journey, then I was sort of living the destiny of my my spiritual name and all that it resonates with. So that's the reason. And I hope that I can bring some insights that are even just fun too. Doesn't have to always be heavy, but I'm not really sure what my content's going to be yet. I want to do readings. I don't know what style I want to do. I don't know if I want to do for the collective or for astrological signs or pick a card readings. But I'm going to experiment, and I will probably settle on what feels right. So if there's any requests, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments below. Please subscribe because I'd love to be a part of this community. And I really thank you for joining me today, and I'm excited to get started. I will try to at least post one video a week. We'll see how that goes. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for all of you tarot enthusiasts out there who got me to do this, because it's great fun. Well, I will see you all in the next video. Thank you.